Hi everyone, this is Nikki from W.consulting, and thanks for joining us today for our session on effective written communication. And what extraordinary times we find ourselves in, where instead of being able to just chat verbally to our colleagues and clients, we are spending a lot more time now communicating in writing, aren't we? Unless, of course, we've set up conference calls and we're becoming masters of Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts. But how can we make sure that when we do write something, we're writing effectively, we're getting our point across, we're making sure that the reader understands what it is that we're writing? And those are the sort of things that we're going to cover today. Please feel free to be as interactive as possible in the chat line. I am online and I can answer any of your questions in the chat. We have recorded this session just to make it easier from a IT point of view, and if people's connections drop, or for instance if mine were to drop. So the session is recorded, but I am online and I can answer any questions or comments that you might have. And please do interact as much as possible. The session is much richer if we all participate. We'll be together for just over 2 hours. It won't be a 3-hour session because we've cut out some of the workshops and discussions that we would have in a classroom setting. So we'll be together for just over 2 hours, and I look forward to hearing from you on the chat line as much as possible. My son says that in some slides I sound cringy. So I think it's been interesting for all of us sharing our work lives with our partners and with our children, hasn't it? So join in and be with us, and I look forward to learning as much from you as hopefully you learn from me during the session. Firstly, has badly written communication become a norm in today's society? A little bit of bad spelling here, or perhaps they just ran out of E's and used F's instead. Some unfortunate branding in this ashtray in Salt Lake, Utah. I'm not quite sure whether we're allowed to go in here or not. The buses aren't really able to park there, are they? I guess you could fail spelling at that school. English definitely does have a lot of excisions in it, and we'll learn about them later. If you stay at this hotel, you'll be fortunate to have great rats. Or if you prefer, you can eat some mice with your vet cook from Food Lovers Market for only 25 bucks. Don't drink and drive. If you do, you might start seeing too many T's. And luckily, this establishment is open because they're encouraging everyone to walk bare through their halls. After some roadworks, thank you very much for your patience. Hello. Stanford University says to us that writing clearly and concisely means choosing your words deliberately and precisely, constructing your sentences carefully to eliminate dead wood, and using grammar properly. By writing clearly and concisely, you will get straight to your point in a way your audience can easily comprehend. And that's what we'd like to help you achieve today. If we send poorly written communication, it could lose money or business or profitability for our firm. You can lose time, your own time and that of other people, because we need to decipher what you've written. And your effectiveness is reduced because discussions are drawn out and decisions sometimes are delayed. And finally, and perhaps more importantly, your name and your personal brand suffers, especially if the person who's reading your writing is one of those grammar police that we all dislike so much. Remember that technology does not mean good business communication. In fact, if anything, technology has reduced our good communication, because we send emails on the fly, we read them on the fly, and it hasn't necessarily enhanced our writing and the way we pause to try and understand what somebody else has written. So today we're talking about written communication, and this includes documents, it includes reports, emails, proposals, WhatsApps, and social media posts, and we'll cover all of those things. So what we will look at in detail is 10 essential rules of effective business writing. We are going to touch on spelling and grammar, and I'm afraid in that section it will feel a little bit like being back at school, as if homeschooling our children hasn't done that enough for us in this period. And we're going to be taking a closer look at emails and some etiquette around emails. So starting with those 10 essential rules. Our first step is that we need to know our audience. Who is going to be reading this document? Firstly, picture your readers. Are they inside your company or are they external? Can you be a bit more casual with people inside your company? Are they, for example, university students or business associates? How well do you know them? How familiar can you be with them? How do you think they'll be receiving this message that you are writing? Will they feel positive about it or negative? That changes the tone of what you write and how persuasive you need to be. How much do they know or understand of your topic? That will inform how much jargon you can use or how much background you need to give. And how much time do they have to read this? Do they have a lot of time? In other words, you can write with more background. Or are you aware that this will need to be really fast and therefore perhaps bullet points will be better? So the more you think about your reader, the more it will change how you write and what you write. So it's important that the first thing you do in any business communication is to have a picture in your mind of your reader. Then we want to improve persuasiveness so that whoever we're writing to will buy into what we're saying. They'll read it, they'll absorb it. How do we improve this persuasiveness? So once we've pictured the reader, try to understand them. What are their beliefs and values? What will their attitude be towards this topic? What are their hot buttons? What motivates them? If you think about what is important to the reader, then you will already write to that motivation as you craft your email or your document. Think about what benefits they can see from your topic. Why should they read this? How can you make sure that what you're writing is written from their point of view as opposed to from your point of view? And try to back up whatever you're writing with data wherever possible. People are less inclined to believe just a personal opinion. They want to know what the motivation is, what the data is behind that. So what we want to do is write this document from the point of view of the reader. It needs to save the reader time or improve his or her profitability or improve their business processes or, perhaps in the case of auditing, keep them out of trouble. Anticipate that the reader might not always agree with you. So provide reasons why they should. If you imagine that your audience is going to be a bit skeptical, anticipate this in advance and respond to those views in your writing. So pre-think their objections and try to answer them as you write. This will ensure that you are addressing their concerns in your writing, and they will appreciate that and see that you have put yourself in their shoes. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes is actually one of the cornerstones of good communication, whether or not it's written or verbal. So if you think about any verbal communication training that you've been on, the same can be applied to when you write. Have you put yourself in the reader's shoes and thought about what it is that he or she would like to get from this document, or how you can make it more relevant to their needs? Then what we do is we use the audience's language. So, for example, you use keywords related to their industry. So if we think about our industry, we use words that will be applicable, whether that is profitability or compliance. Have an appropriate reading level. If you know that you are writing, for example, to the marketing department, you can't go deep into technical detail on financials and financial terms. So try to have the right reading level and technical content. And where possible, paint a picture for the audience. So help them see what the bigger picture is, what the context is. Always assume that your audience is intelligent and fair-minded and will focus on what will help their business. If you assume that they're not intelligent and fair-minded, you might actually speak down to them in your writing. So as long as you've pitched your reading level and the technical content at the right level, then you needn't come across as condescending or as too high level. And also think about what will help their business. If you put yourself in the shoes of the reader, then you'll think in more detail about what it is that they need and how you can draft your communication, your written communication, to illustrate that you understand their business and that you are here to help. And maybe it's not their business. If this is an email to colleagues, show them that you understand their situation. I know that there's been a lot of frustration with the fact that the printer doesn't work. We are replacing our printer, so we're going to have no printer for 2 days, so please prepare for that. But this is to address the current frustrations that we've been having with the printer jamming and the alignment out. So in other words, you're showing the audience that you understand where they are at. And finally, with thinking about your audience, think about your channel. Ask yourself, is writing actually the right channel? Should I be writing? Perhaps I should rather be phoning the person or calling a meeting or giving a face-to-face presentation. So before you start banging out the next email, think to yourself if a different channel, perhaps voice, would be better. You prefer to have written communication when you don't need immediate feedback. Perhaps you need an accurate legal record or just to cover yourself. Or finally, if you have complex information that you know people will need that context and be able to write and digest what you're saying instead of just having verbal communication. So those are all the things to think about. So are you still here? What we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of dingbats every now and again just to keep us engaged. So can anybody think what a common phrase or a word is in this verbal illustration here? So I thought, let's try and find something that's to do with writing, but that's writing and visual at the same time. So this example, you can write it in the comments, but I was going to use this as an example, is an undercover cop. The word cop is under the word cover, so it's an undercover cop. Let's see if you can try your hand at it. What might this common phrase or word be? I'll give you a minute or two to write it in the comments. Okay. it's a cut above the rest. You can see the cut is above, one cut is above the rest, a cut above the rest, which is an idiom to describe that something or someone is better than the norm. So, our next golden rule of effective writing is then, after we've taken time to know our audience, we want to know your message. So, first of all, what is the purpose of writing whatever it is you're writing? A proposal, an email, a document. An email can be, or a document can be about instructing. So this is how you do something. In the case of a fire, you all need to leave your computers and personal belongings at your desk, make your way to the fire escape, don't phone a friend, all of those, an instruction. The next I could be for inform. You want to inform people of business results, of the status of a project. That's informing. The other one is to interpret. So this is to, for example, interpret financial results, to interpret trends, to interpret, let's say, all the stats that we're seeing around the spread of the coronavirus in the world. And finally, to influence. So this would typically be for proposals or for where you're trying to influence people into your way of thinking, or influence them that your results are strong. And often a document also can be a combination of any of these. So I might want to inform you about our results and then influence you to invest in our company. Once you know your purpose, so in other words, is this a feedback document, is it an update to the organization, minutes of meetings, then you can start thinking about what it is that you want to put into that document. And it's important always to think, how will this benefit the reader? Whatever I'm writing, whether it's to inform or to persuade or to interpret, what does the reader need? And how can I make sure that I'm writing in a way that adds value to them? When it comes to generating your ideas related to your purpose, you want to think of all the things that will be relevant for what you want to say, but also in the context of your purpose and your reader. I'll give you an example. I used to work for MoneyGram International, and we ran the regional office for Africa out of Johannesburg. We did a lot of business in West Africa, and we wrote a long proposal document to recommend to the head office in the US that we open up an office in Lagos, Nigeria. There were quite a few reasons why we wanted to open up the office there. Our competitor, Western Union, was very active there and had an office there. They also had a much greater presence. They had obviously then better relationships with all the key banks in the region. And basically they were taking us out as far as sales and market share were concerned. So we wanted to propose to our head office that we also open an office there. One of the other aspects was that we were all traveling a lot to service the West African market. We would fly into Lagos on a Sunday evening and only get back the following Saturday morning, so 1 week out of every month. So when it came to us generating our ideas, what are we going to put into our proposal document? We could talk about things like market share, market presence, sales, customer relationships. We also could talk about the hardship that it was for us traveling there and the impact it was having on our personal lives. So if we were writing that document from a writer-centric point of view, that point about our traveling there often would have been relevant because it was very relevant to us. But if you put yourselves in the shoes of the reader, it was much less relevant. Those readers, they want to know about sales and profitability and market share and visibility. They're not so interested in whether they're poor employees in the South Africa office are exhausted from traveling and having an impact on their family lives. So when it comes to thinking about the ideas that you're going to put into your document, brainstorming, mind mapping, making lists of all the things you're going to put in there, for sure, you might think at first that the travel from South Africa was relevant, but actually it's less relevant unless it was costing a lot of money. The cost of that travel would have been of interest to the decision makers in the US, but certainly not the personal impact that it was having on the employees. So that's how we do it. We generate a lot of ideas and what are all the things that we need to go into this document, and then we can have a look at them and decide which are the key aspects that we want to put in there and which not. Then we can focus on the key points. So eliminate some of those distracting ideas. For example, the personal cost of that travel. That didn't add value to the document. Add new ones if they come to you. So for example, we talk about just the visibility of our competitor versus us. And then what resources do we need to back up your ideas? We need to have costs of what an office would cost, what recruitment would cost, how much it would cost to pay the staff there, how many staff members do we need. So we needed to find out a lot more information than just saying put in an office, because of course the first question would be, what is that office going to cost? Once you've brainstormed and you've put down all your information, what we need to do then is organize it into a flow. You want to tell a story. So we want to see, okay, what is the relationship between all our ideas and information, and how will we get that into a flow? And then we want to make sure that the document, even an email, flows well and makes sense. Then we read it back to ourselves, and if it doesn't make sense, move things around. Back to my earlier example about the replacing the printer in the office. If you just write to everybody and say, we won't have a printer for 2 days, that wouldn't be a great introduction, because everybody will think, oh, I need that printer. I can't live without the printer for 2 days. But if you put it in context first about reminding everybody how the printer has been a frustration, we often have paper jams and the papers are coming out not well aligned. Then, if you then talk about the fact that there'll be no printer for 2 days, people feel more open to accepting that hardship once they've thought about the context. All right, just to engage your brains, what dingbat, what could this be? A common phrase or word from this dingbat. Okay, a backseat driver. Yeah, so it's written backwards. The word seat and driver is written backwards. So this is a backseat driver. And I'm sure all of us have got one of those in our lives, a backseat driver. And hopefully we aren't the ones who are the backseat drivers. Our next step is to think like a reporter. As you can imagine, reporters and journalists are trained to think in a specific way because more than anyone, they need to make sure that they are getting their points across clearly and in a way that everybody understands them. So, what is the way that they think? And that is, when we are too close to our topic, we often omit important information and we assume that the readers know things. For example, for us, a classic case would be an event about an advert about a training event where we omit the venue. So think, have you included all the key information that needs to be given who your audience is? Often when we are too close to our topic, we forget that the audience might not know the context. We forget that the audience might not know our jargon. So what key information is needed? Just do a quick check of the 5 W's and an H. And I'm sure you all know those 5 W's: what, when, why, who, and where. And the H obviously is how. So have you included all of that? Have you given the context or the information? And of course, not giving too much information. Don't tell people the context if you know that they already know it. Step 4 is to polish your tone. That's making sure that we have the right style and words in our writing. So if you think back to the purposes, those 4 I's for the purpose of our writing, to inform, interpret, etc. Consider whether your writing is informative. Do we need to include lots of stats and facts? Informative is what you want them to think. Is it expressive, what you want them to feel? Then you need more expressive, colorful language. And then persuasive writing needs to be emotional and factual, because you want them to act, you want them to decide on something or to do something. So think carefully about your word choice. How formal or informal does this document need to be? Should you use the words impoverished instead of poor? Should we say cannot versus can't? And that all depends on who the audience is and the nature of this document. You can use informal words for daily conversations, mostly emails, but also, even in formal documents, don't get too smart. For example, talk about commence a project instead of start a project. Getting too smart actually makes things quite hard to read. It makes them it makes your documents, the person has to concentrate that much harder because you are using words that just require a little bit more of that mental concentration. So we want to use the right level of formality, but we also don't want to get too smart. Then, my favorite, banishing buzzwords, cliches, and jargon. For example, deep dive. I took a deep dive into this data. We're here for you at the end of an email. IFRS. Does everybody in your audience who's reading this document know what IFRS is? AGSA. Do they know what the AGSA is? Disruptive. Disruptive has become like the latest buzzword. We are a disruptive company, or let's apply some disruptive thinking. We don't want to use this sort of jargon and buzzword in our writing. Service-oriented. Everybody claims to be service-oriented. Going forward. Going forward is a phrase that's become so common in business, and it's actually not good English. Going forward, we will hold this meeting every week. Innovative. Again, like service-oriented. Everybody says that they're innovative. ATL, BTL, TTL. I don't know if anybody in this audience knows what that is. I'm from a marketing background, so for me this is above the line, below the line, and through the line, which are different communication tools. And even that is jargon from the marketing world. COB. Please send it to me by COB on Thursday. Does everybody know what COB is? So there are many others of these. Have a look at your writing, and when it comes to tone, are you setting a tone of sounding almost pompous by using jargon and buzzwords? It's something we have to be careful of. This is more about speaking, but I thought this was quite a good example of jargon and buzzwords. So this is bingo that you can use. You can use it in your next conference call or next meeting if you like. And the minute 5 of these phrases are used in any meeting or in any business setting, or maybe on your next conference call, you can tick them off. They don't have to be in a row like bingo, and you can shout bingo, because it means that there's been too much jargon used. If you look at some of these shelving ideas, par for the course, out of the box, it's a no-brainer. Let's discuss this offline. We'll shoot off an email. I have to confess I'm guilty of some of these myself. I'm sure we all are. And have we stopped to think that it's bingo? It's office jargon, buzzwords. Still on the point of buzzwords and jargon, be careful of using euphemisms. So this is, for example, somebody is pushing up daisies instead of somebody's passed away. And passed away is a euphemism for dying. So avoid those euphemisms if they cause confusion and if you feel that not everybody will know what they mean. Make sure that if you are going to use jargons or acronyms or any industry words which people might not know, just be careful of that. Again, right back to point 1, put yourself in the audience's shoes. And then finally, neologisms. Don't know if you all know what a neologism is. It's a new word. So for example, 15 years ago, the word Google used as a verb wouldn't have even existed. I'm going to Google that. Let's Google this. That's a neologism, and I'm sure everybody knows the word Google, and we all use it now as a verb, but it's a word that didn't exist. And do we sometimes use new words which other people might not know about? Some more common business jargon that we tend to use. Hands-on, being, why don't we just say practical? We are going to ascertain whether or not this is true. We're going to find out. Demanning, just use the word retrenching. I'm going to launch a state-of-the-art process. I'm going to launch a new process. Let's interface with the sales department. Let's discuss it with the sales department. Have you done your inputs for the monthly report, your entries? Normalize. Normalize has become a buzzword or jargon where we should simply use return to normal. When is our situation after this lockdown going to return to normal? What is your scenario? What is your plan? Put on the back burner, put off or delay. This is user-friendly, easy to use. Challenges, problems. Now I know sometimes we prefer to refer to problems as challenges, but again, just think about the context and whether it's necessary. Are you all with us? What is the common phrase or word here? You can write them in the comments section if you've got an idea. Good looking. The word good is looking. Hey, good looking. I'm sure you're all looking good in your lockdown. Hope everybody's finding a way of doing a little bit of exercise and getting the blood pumping. So we've arrived at point 6. And point 6 is to pull it tight. This means keeping our writing short and simple. So for example, utilization of the computer in payroll preparation will bring about a reduction in clerical costs. And I know it sounds a bit strange here now that I'm saying it, but this is the sort of sentence that people will quite commonly write in an email or in a document. What we can say is using the computer to prepare payrolls will reduce clerical costs. And all we've done here is we've turned nouns into verbs. So using to prepare, so instead of saying in payroll preparation, we're saying to prepare payrolls. Or we are in the process of upgrading our IT systems. Instead of saying that, we should say we are upgrading our IT systems. When you see sentences like that, you realize how often we write in a way that isn't tight. It's not efficient writing. We have very long sentences, and now that I've been training this course, I check myself quite often using words like reduction instead of reduce. It's quite common. I think we almost feel that we sound more formal or more professional, whereas in reality, it's just making things hard for the reader. So here are some classic double entry things that we do, which also make our writing a bit loose instead of tight. It's a viable alternative. Well, actually, all alternatives are viable, or they're not an alternative. Will you revert back to me? Please revert to me. Oh, that's past history. It's past, or it's history. Let's meet together and do some forward planning. Let's do some planning. What will be the end result of this? What will be the result? Ah, that will be an added bonus. Bonus. His voice was particularly distinct. That's actually a form of tautology. It's particular and distinct. It's repetition. A free gift, and our marketers love that one. Whereas if something is a gift, it should be free. Let's have a meeting at 9 a.m. in the morning. We've repeated ourselves, haven't we? In actual fact, in fact. Ah, what an unexpected surprise. Surprises are unexpected by their very nature, so we should just say surprise. This is a classic sort of passage. A spot check of randomly selected directories indicated that a number of the directories contained several blank pages. In view of the foregoing, it is suggested that each user review their directory and ascertain whether or not the directory is complete. In the event that the directory is incomplete, the user should return the directory to the issue source for disposal. Now, you have to read that a few times, which is why way back in the beginning of this presentation we said that poor written communication can waste time. We could here just say, please check your directory, and if you have blank pages in it, please return it to us. Here's another example of redundancy. He fails to read my status report each and every time I send it to him by email. That's sometimes how we write, when we could be much more efficient and say, he doesn't read my status report that I emailed to him. Hedging. Hedging means that you're too tentative, and then the reader might not take you seriously. I think this is a good idea, but I'm not sure. I'm sure there are many other options. Please give me your changes. You're almost sounding as if you don't believe in your own ideas. We should avoid that too. And then again, that wordiness. In the event that you happen to agree with me on my proposed course of action, I suggest we move to the action plan stage of this discussion. If you agree with the proposal, we can proceed with the action plan. Now, I know that these are sort of extreme examples, but now that you've seen these examples, you'll start looking at your writing in a different way, because we do so often tend to be wordier than we need to. And I'm sure it's just a human tendency to want to sound professional, when actually it means we're just not crisp in our writing. Please don't try to sound clever. Just be simple and direct and use the right style. Some more wordy phrases that we often see in business writing. At a later date. Later. In the event that there is a fire, please run to the fire escape. If there is a fire, please run to the fire escape. Due to the fact that sales are down, our profitability has been impacted because sales are down. Take into consideration, consider. For the purpose of, we are taking away our printer for the purpose of bringing in a new one or upgrading the existing one. For, with reference to, about. Come to a conclusion, conclude. We'll meet on Thursday and make a decision. We'll decide on Thursday. Submit a proposal, propose. So all of those are things that we just use without thinking, and I hope that in future you'll make sure that your writing doesn't include these wordy phrases. So are you still here? Which dingbat could this be? Which common phrase could this be? I'll give you a little clue. Which word is written on the left of the box? Okay, so it's the word overs on the left, so it's leftovers. There we go, well done. Point number 7. Leave symbols and abbreviations on your phone. So, etc. and written as the ampersand, e.g., ASAP. I often get asked, how do we not use ASAP? So instead of saying, please resolve this ASAP or ASAP, please resolve this by 30th of June. It's tighter and it's less, ASAP can be viewed as being a little bit rude sometimes. We obviously don't use emojis. They don't have any place in business writing. But of course, if you know somebody well, or it's a colleague, or it's somebody you've been dealing with for a long time, you may use them, but just don't use emojis liberally for everybody. And don't use too much punctuation, which of course is also a symbol. Get active. What do we mean by that? Other than doing star jumps on our balcony, or running up and down our driveway, or following a YouTube fitness session? No, it's not about our bodies getting active. It's about our words, our written words, being active or passive. We're talking here about the active and passive voice. The man sees the sun is seen by the man. So which sentence here is passive and which one is active? Of course, the first one is active. The man sees the sun. Rebates will be provided on all new purchases. We will provide rebates on all new purchases. You see how sometimes we write things in a passive voice because, again, it sounds more professional or fancy, but actually it's harder for the reader to understand. The active voice is shorter, it's friendlier, it's clearer, it's easier to understand, and it's a way to brighten your writing. It's also, I find, more personal. It's talking about we and you and our company. So with all of this, what is the ideal language style that we should use when we're writing? We look at George Orwell's elementary rules, and these are a lot of the things we've been talking about. Never use a long word when a short one will do. If it's possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Never use the passive voice when you can use the active. Don't use foreign phrases and buzzwords if there's an everyday English equivalent. But then what George Orwell says is, break any of these rules rather than be offensive. So we should follow the rules we've been talking about. However, if something will be softened or be a bit more polite by breaking the rules, then we should do so. Let me give you an example. Let's say you work for a bank and you need to write to somebody whose husband has passed away and say that we're going to be closing your husband's accounts. If we wrote and we said, "Dear Mrs. Smith, because your husband died, we are going to close his accounts." That would be almost too direct, isn't it? So even though we've said rather be direct, we're now saying in the case of sensitivities, we want to break those rules. So we would say, "Dear Mrs. Smith, due to the unfortunate passing of your husband, his accounts will be closed." So in other words, there we're using an idiom. We're saying the passing of your husband rather than your husband dying. And we're using the passive voice, saying his accounts will be closed rather than we will close his accounts. So we try and follow these elementary rules as far as possible, unless we need to soften our language and soften our meaning with a little bit of license to use the passive voice and to use some idioms or softening phrases. Number 9, we're nearly at the end, there are only 10 of these, is lay it out. So pay attention to layout. If you have long text, will it help the reader if we use numbering? Should we use numbering and sub-numbering? How about if there's a long list of things using a bullet point? Also take into account your text and your font. Do bold things, underline things, indent. Use a font that is easy to understand. So for example, Calibri or Arial, they are easier. Times New Roman, which is a very common font, is a little bit more formal, but it's that little bit harder on the eye for the reader. So there's a trade-off there between the formal and the readability. And then finally making sure that you use headings and subheadings. So what you want to do is take a look at your document, if you've got a long document, and see, can we help the reader by using any of these layout tools in order to make the document a little bit more legible and easy to follow. Here's an example. You can see that using a strange font, immediately it's a little bit harder on our eye, isn't it? Format is important, dingbat. So here's another dingbat. I hope you're enjoying these. I just thought they would break the tedium of what is quite a more dry course than some of our professional skills courses. So what do we have here? We have the word light, light, and then a knee. The knee is on the word light, the words. Any ideas? Keep them coming. Good, so the solution is neon lights. Neon lights, neon lights. Like the Times Square or Piccadilly Circus lights, neon lights. Finally, number 10 is proofread your work. So what we want to do here is make sure that we go back to our document, all documents, even a short email, and just check that we've written them correctly. One of the problems is that spell check won't always work. Here's a classic one. For more information, please contact our sales manager. Misspelling the word manager is very common, and I myself actually see it quite often. And spell check won't pick that sort of thing up. So review your work, read through what you've written, analyze the main points and the sub-point, and make sure that all the arguments hold and that the supporting evidences are clearly detailed? And maybe do you need to move things around or revise the order? Remember that people always remember the first and last points made, so make sure that you begin and end with strong points. And don't forget your purpose. Was your purpose of this document instructing, informing, interpreting, or influencing? Was that achieved? If it's, for example, that you want to influence, do you find that your writing was persuasive enough? If your objective was to interpret, have you actually interpreted the data, or have you just presented it, which would be more of an informing way of writing? So did you actually interpret things for the reader? Then you can read through and review your work, and these are some of the questions to ask yourself or to ask somebody else who reads it. What is coming across here? What was the document's main purpose? Have you addressed it to the correct intended reader? Will the information provided convince the reader to act? In other words, to support you, to make a decision? Haha, you see I said make a decision instead of decide. Is the document technically accurate? What is the most understandable thing about the content? So in other words, what jumps out at you? How quickly were you convinced of the document's main point? Can I leave anything out? Remember, we want to pull our writing tight. Is it as tight as it could be? What parts belong in different sections? Should I move things around? Is there anyone else who I should ask to give me some more input? Was anything confusing? How can it be fixed? So particularly in a big document, but it is worth just glancing through your emails as well and just checking the answers to these questions. So let's summarize our 10 rules. And rather than list all 10 of those again, here's sort of a summary of a summary, which might be a little bit easier to remember. We are going to look at the 5 W's and an H. So firstly, who? Who is this document for? Remember that our reader comes first. What is their level of knowledge about the topic and their level of understanding? How much jargon can we use, for example? Then, why are you writing this document? What is the purpose? Don't forget those 4 I's which show us the purpose. What will you say? Have you done your brainstorming? What are the key points that you need to get across? Have you mind mapped and made lists? And then have you eliminated any points that aren't necessary? And then where is your document going to go? How is it going to flow? Where will your main points go? Have you put them in a correct and logical order? Where is the reader? Is he or she sitting at his desk with a lovely big screen that will show up all your bullet points and numberings? Or might he or she be on their mobile phone, sitting at a red robot reading this, or standing at the luggage carousel? Where is this document going to land up? Might it be seen, for example, by the media? Might it be seen by a union? Is there anything controversial in it? For example, if it lands up on your boss's desk, are you happy with the way you've written it and what you've said? When do they need it by? When are they going to be reading it? Does it need to be sent out before a meeting or a deadline? And if so, how long in advance do they need it in order to read it? So, given that, when do you need to start writing? How long is it going to take you? And don't forget to over budget for that. And then finally, how are you going to say what you need to say? What tone of writing do you need to use? How formal or informal does it need to be? And how will you communicate? Is this best done in an email, in an attachment, in a long report? And potentially, is it actually better done over the phone or in a meeting rather than in the written form? We finished with our 10 essential rules of effective business writing. So before we look at spelling and grammar, it's probably time for a little bit of a comfort break again. So I'll leave the placeholder slide up again for 5 minutes, and feel free to stretch your legs Go and grab a cup of coffee, take a breather, and we'll chat again in 5 minutes. Welcome back from the break. Let's move on to spelling and grammar. So, English can be weird. It can be understood through tough, thorough thought, though. And this is one of my favorite ways that I show how difficult English is. And I'm very grateful to be a native English speaker or a mother tongue English speaker, because to try and explain to somebody why through, tough, thorough, thought, and though are all pronounced differently when the spelling of O-U-G-H is the same is impossible. So, starting off with spelling and some of the things to look out for. There's a few different ways that people misspell words. There are three common kinds of confusion. So sometimes a word is confused with a shorter one that sounds the same, or a different one that sounds the same. Or when you use a word of one part of speech, it gets confused with the same word when used as another part of speech. Let's look at what we mean here. So we'll have consensus or census. So consensus is agreement and census is a survey. Supersede means to negate all previous things, but precede means to come before, what comes before. And then fulfill is sometimes used incorrectly with full or fill. And in that example, it might mean, should I fulfill the form or should I fill the form? So to fill something means to fill up a definite thing, like fill a mug with water or filling in a form with pencil. But fulfill means more to complete an action or a requirement. So it's more related to non-tangible things such as requirements or objectives or a promise. The next common confusion is when we confuse two words that sound the same but they're spelt differently. So I won't go through all of these, but something like altar and altar. So the first one is the altar in church, the second one is altar, which means to change. There's complement and complement. So complement, there's actually a verb, and complement is a noun. So if I tell you that your jacket complements your trousers, that means that they go together, and that's a verb. And that means I've just paid you a compliment, which is a noun. You can look at stationery and stationery, that's another common one. And here you can remember that stationary with an A is like a car. The car is stationary, so it's got an A in it, like stationary. And stationary is like a pen and a pencil, and those have got an E in them, like stationary. Counsel and counsel, that's the one on the left again is a verb, and the one on the right is a noun. So I will counsel you, I'll give you advice. And are you on the university council, like being on the leadership? At the bottom we've got principal and principal. So principal on the left is the important one, like the head of the school, principal. And a principal on the right is what is the principle behind this thinking? What's the idea behind the thinking? And here again, spell check won't help. So when we talk about reading and revising your document and perhaps handing your document over to somebody else to have a look, that's why it's a good idea sometimes, just to get somebody else's eye looking over things. Then a word, when you use it as part of one part of speech versus another part of speech. So if sometimes words, when they are nouns, are spelled differently from when we use them as a verb. So noun, remember, rhymes with clown. So practice, license, advice, those are all nouns. My doctor's practice, he gave me good advice. And then when we use them as verbs, then you would change that C into an S. And people often put in an S instead of a C. So it's quite helpful to think, if it's a noun, noun rhymes with clown, so I use a C. And a verb, I use the S, and I still have to use that little trick every time when I'm writing. So I hope it helps you for the future as well. So which of these is correct? Doctors need a license to practice, or doctors need a license to practice? You can write it in the comment section. Which one is correct, the top one or the bottom one? Okay, yeah, the bottom one is correct because the license is the noun and to practice is the verb. Okay, so another problem is when two words with the same spelling are pronounced differently and have different meanings. So here's some examples. If I see these things, I usually just save them and pop them into this presentation, more just to show really how difficult English is. And that's why we mustn't beat ourselves up. Some people say, oh, I can't spell, or I find English really hard. And English is really hard. Look at these. The bandage was wound around the wound. The farm was used to produce produce. Let's go down to number 9. When shot at, the dove dove into the bushes. The insurance was invalid for the invalid. There was a row among the oarsmen about how to row. So you can see number 6 there. The soldier decided to desert his desert in the desert in the desert. It's really just goes to show that when we meet people, we need to be a little bit forgiving if their English isn't perfect. And don't forget the spelling rule. And as I said, it would sometimes feel as if we've gone back to school. Here we are with that good old spelling rule. I don't know who had it drummed into you at school. I was at a convent with quite strict nuns for school. Explains everything. And they used to go I before E except after C. So here you go. I remember that refrain in my head. I before E except after C. So believe, niece, siege. Those ones don't come after a C. But sealing, deceive, and receive come after a C. And particularly the word receive and the word deceive. Those ones we do use in business, and believe. So those are ones to take note of. I before E except after C. However, there are some exceptions. Caffeine, codeine, counterfeit, protein, C's. Because English just likes to be difficult. And then the word species. Comes after a C, but it's an I and an E. So just because English loves exceptions, once again use your spell check, and if you're not sure, look it up. There's great resources in Microsoft Word. Okay, a little dingbat to keep us on our toes. Anyone know what this dingbat represents? Yeah, so there are 8 O's here. So it's pot, 8 O's, potatoes. Let's have a look at some grammar and punctuation. So here's one of my favorite little cartoons from the Grammar Police. And me and Steve weren't anywhere near the school at the time. Don't you mean Steve and I? What's up? I'm allergic to grammatical errors. You're coughing up blood. I didn't know allergies could cause such a bad effect. Are there others like you? It looks like it's getting worse. How specific do these errors have to be? For the love of God, stop! So let's look at some of those common grammatical errors. Me and Steve. So me and Steve weren't anywhere near the school at the time. A tip here is to leave out the other person and then it'll become easier. You wouldn't say me wasn't anywhere near the school at the time. You would say I wasn't anywhere near the school. The same thing happens when you use yourself at the end of a sentence. Do you want to go to the movies with Steve and I? Here you would actually say, do you want to go to the movies with me? But you've confused yourself by saying Steve and I. So you wouldn't say with I, you would say with me. do you want to go to the movies with me? Therefore you say, do you want to go to the movies with me and Steve, or with Steve and me? Then the next one is your and your. Your is you are, whereas your is the possession, your laptop, your car, your house. Then there's affect and effect. So effect is a result, it's a noun. So to help yourself remember this, think of the net effect. It comes across, just comes very smoothly off your tongue, the net effect. So that's when we would use it, it's a result. Affect is a verb to impact or change. That affected me greatly. Or when you insult me, it affects my mood. The exception, because English loves exceptions of course, is when you do use effect as a verb, and that's usually to effect change or to drive something, to lead something. Then you would use the word effect. But generally, rather think of it as effect being a noun, like the net effect, and affect being a verb to impact or change. Then there's there, and there. Their beach towels are over there. They are at the beach. They are at the beach. It's versus its. So normally an apostrophe S shows possession, doesn't it? But of course English, as we've said, loves exceptions. So in this case, it's with an apostrophe is it is, and it's not possessive. But if you do have a possessive use of its, you actually don't use the possessive there. So if you said the cat's tail, you would say the cat apostrophe S, tail. But if you were saying its tail, you don't use the apostrophe there. Confusing, isn't it? It's just something we have to learn and remember. Then specific is often mispronounced as Pacific or Pacific with an E or an A. So Pacific is the ocean, Pacific with an E doesn't actually exist, and specific is the correct word then, it means exact. And then finally there was just the spelling mistake of the word allergies, which of course should be G-I-E-S at the end. Let's have a look. You can just remind yourself and see them in context. Here we go, our little cartoon. And again, this is really, some of it's really difficult to remember, and this is why we say when you revise your work, it might help, if it's an important document, to get somebody to look over it for you and just see if they can pick up any errors. Other mistakes, there's jumbled verbs. If you send me the report, I'll look at it quickly. If you quickly send me the report, I'll look at it. So the first one is saying that I will quickly look at it, whereas the second one is saying if you quickly send it to me. So think very carefully about where you put your adverbs, because they can change the meaning of the sentence. Make sure that you've got your adverb as close as possible to the noun that you want it to, to the verb that you want it to apply to. And then another one is the split infinitive. So an infinitive is to run, to send, to go, to write. And we often put an adverb in the middle of an infinitive. So I'm going to quickly send you the report. What we should say here is I'm going to send you the report quickly, or I'm going quickly to send you the report. So in other words, what we're doing is we're not splitting that infinity of to send. So just remember that if you're ever talking about to send, to run, to write, to anything to do something, we shouldn't put an adverb in between the to and the verb. However, to boldly go where no man has gone before is a split infinitive, but it's also legendary, so we'll allow it. So more tips to use. Just be careful of your apostrophe. So apostrophe S indicates the possessive in the singular, and the apostrophe after the S is the possessive in the plural. So you would say the client's funds or client's accounts. The first one is singular and the second is plural. Don't use an apostrophe in abbreviations, and this is what we often see. People will say 1990s or NGOs or ATMs with an apostrophe between the abbreviation and the S, and that's not correct. And then, as we've said, its is the shortened form of it is, whereas it's without the apostrophe is the possessive. So, punctuation is important. I'm giving up wine every day all month. No, wait, that came out wrong. I'm giving up wine every day all month. So either you're giving up wine, or in the second case, you're going to be drinking it every day. Time to eat children. So in that case, commas can save lives, because obviously if you put a comma after time to eat, comma, children, then you're a nice kind mum. But the other one, you look, there's a little bit of a different message there, isn't it? The Oxford comma is, we were all taught, weren't we, not to put a comma before and in a list. So if you say, I'm going to eat peas, carrots, beans, potatoes, and rice, you wouldn't put a comma after potatoes and before the and rice. But sometimes we have to put a comma there, otherwise the meaning of the sentence is incorrect. So we do sometimes have to put a comma before the word and in a list in order to make sure that our meaning is correct. So here was a real story from a couple of years ago when Nelson Mandela passed away. World leaders at Mandela tribute, Obama, Castro, handshake and same-sex marriage date set. So that sounds like Obama and Castro are getting married. But actually the same-sex marriage was a different news item from Obama and Castro shaking hands. So there we should say Obama-Castro handshake, comma, and same-sex marriage date set. Similarly here, thanks to my parents, Ayn Rand, and God. So that's saying I'm thanking three different people. I'm thanking my parents, I'm thanking Ayn Rand, and I'm thanking God. If you didn't have that Oxford comma in there before the word and, you are saying to my parents, Ayn Rand and God. So in other words, God and Ayn Rand are your parents. So that's why we just have to be careful with commas. That's quite with an Oxford comma, it's quite an important punctuation tool. Some more tips when you're writing letters. Obviously a formal letter should be dear sir or madam or dear title, or if you're on fairly good terms with the person and it's an email, you'll use the first name. And they end yours faithfully, yours sincerely, or yours truly. There is sometimes a rule, and in very sort of proper English, if you know the name of the person, then you write yours sincerely. So if you're saying, Dear Mr. Mackenzie, you would say yours sincerely, whereas if it's dear sir or dear madam, you would write yours faithfully or yours truly. But I don't think we need to worry about that in 2020. Emails, of course, are less formal, and we are going to go through emails a little bit later in the presentation. When we write numerals in a document, we should spell them out, the numbers 1 to 9, but afterwards, after 10, you can use figures from 10 onwards. So have a look at this passage and just think in your mind how you would correct it. Dearest Peter, it's come to my attention that there are too many staff members abusing the accommodation allowance. This has resulted in causing a major loss to our yearly revenue and a loss to our bottom line number. I need this to be given your urgent attention and get this sorted out ASAP. This behavior is inconsistent with our PVPs and made us look bad from a PR POV. I know that you agreed with me and support me. If you wish to be able to talk to me about this serious issues, then it's in your hands to make a meeting request. Cheers for now, Simon. So what are some of the things that you would correct there? If you want to just pop them in the comments, if you've picked up a spelling mistake, or just, you don't have to write out the whole thing, but perhaps just write out a word or a phrase that you think needs to be improved or corrected. PVP, yeah, I always get asked about what is a PVP and what is a POV and PR. Most people know what PR is. So, and that's exactly the point we were making earlier. Don't use acronyms if you're not sure that everybody will know what they mean. So I'm assuming that PVP is a personal value proposition and a POV is point of view, but who knows? So this is an interesting exercise because when I ask people to have a look at this passage, usually there are a lot of points about the spelling and grammar, and that's true. But in reality, the key thing is here that if we think about keeping our writing tight and crisp, we don't need to have such a long email, do we? Firstly, we should just say dear, not dearest. And then we could just say, Dear Peter, many staff members are abusing the accommodation allowance, which impacts our bottom line. Please can you take a look at this and resolve it? Let me know if you have any questions. Best regards, Simon. So instead of this long message and this long email where we repeat ourselves several times, and of course, I would argue that abusing the accommodation allowance doesn't really impact our revenue, it only impacts our bottom line. We needn't write such a long message, should we? So this passage just draws our attention to the fact that, yes, by all means, pay attention to your grammar and your spelling, but also pay attention to, have you kept your writing tight and crisp and to the point? Honey, tell me what's wrong. Just another little break. Quickly looking at professional documents. Sticky notes. When should we use them? Be cautious. Remember that half the time they'll fall off somebody's computer screen, so we only use them when we don't need a paper trail or proof, or when it's not critical that the receiver gets the message. And then emails are the most acceptable form of memo today, but think carefully about if you might need a formal document or if an email will do. If we look at working the minutes, so the purpose of minutes is to remind people of key action steps or agreements and who owns any of those actions and by when they need to be completed. We don't usually need a recap of the entire meeting unless this is a formal board meeting. What I always say to people here is I believe that it's so crucial to have minutes of meetings, but none of us have got time to write them. So my two tips here are, firstly, if it's a recurring meeting, rotate the responsibility for who's going to record the actions that come out of that meeting. Rotate that responsibility among the attendees of the meeting. So let's say you have a regular MANCO or a regular team meeting. Make it the responsibility of a different person each week or each month to record that meeting and just keep a record of the key action steps and the agreements. I also think it's perfectly acceptable to type these up in email during the meeting, as long as everyone understands that that's all that person is doing on their laptop or on their tablet, and that the minute then the meeting ends, they can just hit the send button. Of course, you do have to be sure if it's a new skill that people are learning that they are recording things properly. So you might want as a manager to just cast your eye over what was written down there and if all the points were covered. But I do believe that this is a very effective way, if we're talking about written communication, it's a very effective way of making sure that that minutes are kept of meetings and that it really makes sure that the meeting is recorded. And if you spread the load by making sure that everybody's got their own turn to write the minutes and that they're allowed to do it during the meeting, then it's a much more effective way of keeping minutes of meetings. And I'm talking about just casual internal meetings or potentially even a meeting with a client. I do believe it's fine to say to a client, I'm just going to be typing up our mutual action points during the meeting, if that's okay with you. Just seek permission first, and most times it's fine. So basically, minutes just need what the topic was. You can put what the key points were that were discussed, what the action is, the completion date, and who needs to be responsible for it. And then, of course, make sure that you do look at the previous meeting's minutes when you meet again. As we said, it's perfectly acceptable to do minutes in meetings by keeping it and keep it short and simple and do them by email. Okay, follow up. If somebody writes to you, or if you've written to somebody and you're not sure, they haven't done what you've asked yet, at what point should we follow up and when do we do it? Well, it very much depends on the circumstance. So when should we do it? I suppose it depends on what the deadline is and how far away it is, and also if the person acknowledged your email or not. So again, think about the urgency of the situation and again the tone of voice in which you're going to follow up with the person. How should you do it? It's sometimes better and often better just to pick up the phone and have a chat and say, hi, I sent you that email. How's it going? When are you going to be able to get to it? Or when can I have your response? So often to follow up by means of a phone call is actually better than having to write to somebody. Are there some times we should not? Sure, if it was a voluntary survey, for instance, if it was just information, or perhaps we've been able to get the information from someone else. Again, following up depends on various factors, and it's worth just taking a little bit of time and planning how and when and in what tone you are going to follow up with somebody. And then, because this is about written communication, don't forget those wonderful words, thank you, making sure that you're acknowledging any gifts you've received, good work that people have done, and if it is that somebody's done a great job or gone the extra mile, do it publicly. Copy in their boss, copy in others in the team. Let's make sure that we are using our written communication also to recognize people and build relationships. Okay, what do we see in this dingbat? Any ideas? So this one is the word the after the word math. So it's the after math, the aftermath. So the aftermath of the battle was, well, we could say, what will be the aftermath of the coronavirus? Big questions. If we could answer those, life would be a lot simpler, wouldn't it? Okay, we're into our final section of the session. Perhaps, yes, I think let's look at a 5-minute break here again, just a little leg stretch, go and get a cup of coffee, and we'll chat again in 5 minutes. We're now going to look at emails and some tips around emails and etiquette. So, communication is part of our lives, and emails have impacted all aspects of our lives. Not tonight, dear. Didn't you get my email? I'm sure there are quite a few of us emailing each other in the same house at the moment during lockdown. How many F's are on this slide? When you think you know the answer, write it in the comments or questions box. Okay, there are actually 13 of them, and what happens is that we don't actually read the F's that we see in and of, or we might have missed the 2 F's in office. So there are 13 F's, and the reason why we do this is it just gives you an illustration of how easy it is to miss things in email, isn't it? And I'm sure all of us have made the mistake where we read things too quickly and we respond without really understanding. So this gives us an illustration of how easy it is to miss things in a short text. This is a short text, so we could miss that much more in an email. Some things to think about. Normal day-to-day messages can cause problems if we respond with offhand remarks, unguarded comments. Sometimes we just are careless. Sometimes you answer emails on the run, so be cautious. You don't want to get into trouble, and you certainly don't want to get your organization into trouble. So what are some of the things that we should look at around emails? Firstly, one line can say it all. The subject line is the most important part of the email. So make it to the point and on one line on what the email is about. I don't know about you, but I often just scan down my inbox and see what the most important ones are. And I leave emails that I know are not really related to me, and I leave them unread in my inbox. And I'm sure that I'm not that unusual in this. So make sure that your subject line is meaningful and it will cause people to open and read your email. I love this when people say, please read this email. Why should I read the email? Okay, so make sure that it's really relevant. For example, a useful subject such as subject B. Now I can go in and I can read why project Q is cancelled and what we're going to do about it. The next one is limit your recipients. If you copy too many people into an email, the less likely it is that any single person will respond, or you'll get too many people responding. So make sure you've thought really carefully about who you're going to write to, and that you've put the correct people onto the email who can actually do something, or that you really need to respond. When should you and when shouldn't you copy the recipient's boss? So generally, you can copy the recipient's boss if it was the boss who requested something, and you are now asking for somebody in the boss's team for something, then you can copy them in so that you can see that the boss can see that you actually are doing what it is that they need doing. And the best time, of course, to copy the recipient's boss is when the recipient has done a great job and you are praising or thanking them for something. Then definitely you should copy in their boss in that circumstance. Remember to help the recipient. CC stands for courtesy copy, and that means it's for their interest only. Theoretically, people who are in the CC box should actually not need to take action from your email. And then BCC is a blind courtesy copy, and in that case you're actually talking behind someone's back. So just be careful about why you might need to BCC somebody. I know a lot of people use BCC when they are sending a bulk email to people, and I suppose that's a different circumstance. Be very careful of the reply to all button. I've had a circumstance where, again, when we were doing a lot of business in Nigeria, one of our clients wanted something and the business development manager sent this request through to our boss, but he had copied in the client and she didn't see that, and she hit the reply to all button and she said, "What? Are they smoking their socks? Question mark, exclamation mark, question mark, question mark. No," with about 5 exclamation marks after the no. So of course that wasn't an ideal thing for the client to see, and we needed to do a lot of fancy footwork to try and rectify that relationship after that. So just be careful that you're not replying to all, or that you're not mistakenly copying somebody in that you don't want to. Remember that emails can form a record, and we need to be very careful who we're emailing and about what. Don't use caps lock. It's seen as rude and shouting. So just be careful that we don't do that. And I see that there's actually an apostrophe missing after people's there, isn't there? It gets people's backs up. So just, yeah, so don't use caps lock. It really is not appropriate business language. Try to keep your emails short. If your email needs to be very long, are you sure you shouldn't be calling a meeting rather? Or perhaps putting an attachment in a PowerPoint slide. So a very long email is seldom to get read properly, and even if people do read it, they don't necessarily then absorb all the information they should. So consider either calling a meeting or picking up the phone or attaching a PowerPoint presentation. Don't send an email to someone sitting 2 desks away. Get up and go and speak to them. Wouldn't it be nice in these circumstances if we could, now that we're all on lockdown at home? But human interaction is healthy, and you can also get answers to things much more quickly. So try not to phone or email people if they're really close to you. It's also courtesy, isn't it? Make sure that you respond correctly. So often there's at some points, for example, let's say we're doing some business in Mozambique, and I'll write to the people there and I'll say, would you like me to do the printing, and which hotel am I going to stay in, and should I get a transfer to the airport, or is your driver going to collect me? And then I might get a response saying, you are booked into the Southern Sun in Maputo, and they will collect you. But then that still hasn't answered my question about who's going to do the printing for the training. So now instead of just a 2 email exchange, I have to respond, and then the other person has to respond again. So we've gone from 2 to 4, and that's a very simple example. But you can see how emails can just escalate if people don't respond correctly to your requests. Change the subject line halfway along if necessary. If you find that an email's been going back and forth for a long time, and the subject is actually quite different now, it's quite okay to change that subject line if it means that the email becomes more relevant to the current conversation. And then remember that when we're sending to smartphones, the person might not be able to see everything on their smartphone and might not be able to respond adequately. So just keep that in mind. Again, with smartphones, be reminded that pretty colors and different fonts and different colors can result in the message being lost. So just make sure that you keep it simple from a visual point of view, and then also make sure that you cut to the chase. Say things as briefly and plainly as possible, as we discussed earlier on in this session. Don't use vague questions. If you know that a question is vague or ambiguous in your email, don't ask it, and also don't reply if other people send you vague questions. What kind of person do you think Steve is? I just don't know where I'm going wrong. Everyone thinks my ideas are rubbish. What do you think? Those are sort of trivial examples, but you can definitely see examples in people's emails where questions are asked which aren't really appropriate for an email conversation. Just think twice about attachments. Only if necessary do we need to attach big files. So usually we'll rather try to attach a link and ask permission first. Some people don't have the bandwidth or don't have the capacity to receive big attachments. So think very carefully about what you are attaching, and also keep in mind confidential information and the risks there, and make sure that you've also sent the email to the right people if you might have attachments that are confidential. Also remember that some attachments are simply offensive. If it's something that appeals to your sense of humor, are you sure that the other person will share your sense of humor and your approach to that? And then make sure that you open any attachment before sending it to make sure it's the right attachment. I once sent, or nearly sent, we had some clients, and I nearly sent one client information to another client instead of vice versa. And obviously that would have been a terrible mistake, and I'm sure that all of you also have information that you definitely can't have spread among different clients. So just be very careful with attachments. Now, a colleague copies you into the following mail, and you are John Smith. Have a look at this. Dear boss, copying in you, and you are John Smith. I'd like to inform you that the reason for the incomplete project is that John Smith did not deliver. I asked him constantly to update me, but he ignored those requests and has now resulted in the bank losing a R1 million deal. I think that he should receive a disciplinary warning for incompetence and not giving a damn about the company or his job. So now you are John Smith. How do you feel? You freak out, don't you? So our next guidance is just chill out. If you receive a sarcastic or digging or irritating email, you want to retaliate right then, and if you respond in that moment and in that feeling, you will be making a mistake. So just take a deep breath and wait 24 hours before responding. And keep in mind that you don't want to say something in an email that you wouldn't say in person. Or for that matter, think about other things, social media, WhatsApps, etc. And also, don't copy in the world when you respond to a negative email. This just creates a group argument. Once again, in these cases, it's better to pick up the phone and have a conversation. Use the right tone. We did speak about tone earlier, but tone is very important, and we often forget it in emails because emails are quick and we're responding on the fly and we're overwhelmed. So we want to look at choosing the right words and then writing to control your tone. So think about what words you have written. You could say that somebody's a skinny, starved chick with outrageously big hair. Or you could say she's a lovely, slender lady with great volume to her hair. So just make sure that you've chosen the right words. Don't say you've failed to respond to my email. Rather write to somebody and say, just a heads up, I'm still waiting for a response to this email. Okay, so we need to bear in mind that your voice is not there softening what you're saying. So be careful that we're choosing the right words. Think about how you would speak to your reader in person and ask yourself, if this email was forwarded to my boss, would I be okay with the words that I've used in it? So how do we look at those words? Another thing is to use pronouns rather being personal as opposed to impersonal pronouns, or impersonal words. So, for example, you may use the Executive Health Club on weekends as opposed to employees may use the Executive Health Club on weekends. This is email. We want to be speaking to the person and make it as personal as possible. When you refer to yourself or the organization, talk about I and we. I discovered that our mailroom clerks were throwing away most of the promotional flyers, as opposed to it was discovered that most of the promotional flyers were being thrown away. So let's just keep it as personal and direct as possible. Then remember about writing in the active voice. It makes your email tone clearer and more direct, and it makes the doer clear. Remember, it also keeps you from sounding bureaucratic or overly formal. We will gladly provide funding and materials just as soon as the foundation accepts your proposal. Passive voice would say, funding and materials will be provided promptly when the proposal has been accepted. You see, so we're just being a little bit more colloquial and direct. Greetings and closings. It's better to write, hello so-and-so, hi so-and-so, dear so-and-so. How's it, hiya, yo dude, hey there. That's not acceptable. If you're writing to a group, try to think of a nice name or term for that group. Dear leadership team, hello interns. Writing hi all, hello everyone, hey there is a bit vague and casual. So it's much better also just from a team spirit point of view to try to think of a nice friendly term for the recipients of that email. Don't forget to close your emails nicely and to write an action-oriented close. Thank you in advance for sending me the proposal, or I'll call you on Tuesday to schedule the meeting. It's really great if you can make sure that the outcomes of the email are really clear and unambiguous when you are closing your email, your actions and those of the other person. You so often see emails saying, I hope you are well. Dear so-and-so, I hope you are well. How else can we say this that sounds a little bit different? And here are some ideas that we can use just to make things a little bit more brighter and more interactive than dear so-and-so, I hope you are well. I hope you're having an A+ week. Anything exciting happening in Josie? What's the latest in your world? Are you excited for the long weekend? I hope you enjoyed, let's say you've seen them recently somewhere. I hope you enjoyed the finance in Darba. I hope this is a little bit more casual. I hope everything's groovy at Sun International. How are you holding up in this heat or this cold? Or you could say, I hope you're keeping dry in this rainy weather. So here are some examples. They are in your notes, so you can have a look at them. And I just think it's better to mix it up a little bit. I quite like the bottom, near the bottom there. I'm reaching out because I was really interested in what you said in your presentation, and I think we could work together. Something like that. And then at the end you could say any good plans for the weekend, wishing you a great weekend or rest of week. So there are some ideas with how we can make things a little bit brighter and not so monotonous. Don't forget to be polite. Being polite is infectious. Don't forget your little please and thank yous. And then don't over apologize. So apologize by all means if you've made a mistake, but don't sound ingratiating or pathetic. Sorry it's taken so long to get back to you, when actually they only wrote to you the day before. So let's say you have made a mistake. Here are some alternatives for apologizing in emails. Thanks for flagging. Good catch. I'll make the necessary updates or changes. Many thanks for noticing the error, so and so. We'll correct our brochure and send you a revised version. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll make sure to X, Y, and Z. So those are some ways that we can answer emails without apologizing. Remember not to kill with punctuation. We do need punctuation, so we do need to remember our full stops and commas and make sure that we've got that right. But we also don't want to overuse punctuation marks, so overly use exclamation marks and question marks. I sent you an email last week about this matter. look at how if we just left out those exclamation marks and question marks, it changes the whole tone of that sentence, doesn't it? Make sure we write properly. So email is not texting. Do not shorten words. See you later or great. It's not the right context, and we really shouldn't shorten words like that. As I said, if it's somebody that we know well, we can certainly use emojis, a little smiley face if necessary, but it's not something that we should generally do even in emails. Remember to write the email and then address it. Now that sounds very odd, but sometimes you've got a more complex email and you write it, then you can review it after you've written it and then see, okay, who are the best people who actually need to receive this email and who should be in the to line and who should be in the CC line. Also remember that sometimes you might send the email to the person that you're talking about, so be careful of that, especially in WhatsApps and messages as well. And then writing the email first and then addressing it also allows you to think about who should be copied into the email after you've written it. And you get it right and your recipients are the correct person that you need to decide things or to take action. Now, that's a bit dangerous because we say always respond. I don't mean respond to every small message. What we mean here is emails that request something from you. Just pop the sender a message to say, I've seen the email and I'll get on to it. Otherwise, people sit and wonder if you've read the email that they've sent, and you don't want them to spam you with follow-up emails. So you just send them a quick message saying, thanks, I got your request and I'll send you the report on Friday. Then you're also letting them know what your timing is and giving them peace of mind. And then if you said you'll send it to them on Friday, make sure you do send it to them by Friday. And if you're running late, send a message to them on Thursday and say, sorry, I'm running late. I won't be able to send it to you on Friday, but I'll get it to you first thing on Monday morning. Delete chain mail. So if you don't send this email to 5 of your friends, your cat will die, and if you do, you'll win the lotto, and if you don't, you'll have bad luck and all of that. Please, it's really not professional to send such emails on. It irritates people, and in all this busyness of our lives, we have very little time to deal with that sort of thing on emails. That can be kept for whatever you want to do on Facebook and more social things. In email, don't forget to use the wonderful technology we have. We have folders. So, for example, this is not a course on Microsoft Outlook and how best to use it, but you can use folders. For example, let's say you subscribe to the SAA newsletters, or well, that sounds like travel, and travel is curtailed at the moment. Maybe specials on deliveries from one of the retailers. So you can automatically make sure that those emails that you've subscribed to go to their own folder, and you can just check them out when you've got time. You can have rules you can set up rules that will do that for you. So all emails that come from Pick and Pay or Woolworths will get sent automatically to their respective folders. You can block messages too, and also unsubscribe from being on mailing lists that are taking up a lot of your time. Make use of voting buttons. So we now at W.consulting, we make use of a voting button which has saved everyone's time. If we're submitting tenders for work and we need to know if there are any conflicts of interest within the organization, do you have anything to do with XYZ company? We can just click yes or no and give our response that way. So that saves people a lot of time. We've mentioned it earlier, but don't forget mobile devices, and that if people are receiving your written communication on a mobile device, have you taken that into account with the length of your message and how you've laid it out. So here's just a summary of all the points we've raised about emails and email etiquette. And again, these are in your notes, so I won't go through them in too much detail, but just make sure that we are ensuring that our communication via emails is as effective as possible, especially considering the overuse of email and the deluge of emails that we all receive on a daily basis. These days, business writing also takes place on social media, so I thought it would be a good idea just to add in a couple of slides about social media, since this also makes up part of what we write and what our business image is, and how we can be building our own brand as well with social media. So firstly, just make sure that your social media accounts are updated. Do you have an old LinkedIn account, for example? Do you have any old accounts that you've forgotten about? Just make sure that you go through and update any accounts that need updating. Does your LinkedIn profile, for example, need your new position added to it? And maybe remove and delete any old accounts. Maybe, I don't know, there was a dating website that you used to be on. Make sure that your profile is removed from there. Then make sure that you identify your areas of expertise and how you want to be seen. And here your writing becomes important. So if you want to share content that's engaging and useful, remember that each time you share something, it's building up your reputation and your brand on social media. So think about what it is that you want to share. And don't forget that if people end up seeing your Facebook profile, for instance, and it's very different from your LinkedIn profile, which is typically a more business-oriented one, make sure that those two things don't clash in terms of values or in terms of the overall image that you want to portray. I'm not saying be a total nerd, but just keep in mind that you can't have a split personality on your different social media profiles. The next one is use apps to make it easier. So something, for example, like Hootsuite will post content across all your social media accounts and provide analytics for you. So if you are wanting to use social media for business, it's quite worthwhile becoming familiar with something like Hootsuite. Make sure that you share content regularly, and they've done some research around this. It's too hard to work with too many sites. So work with just 2 or 3 key sites, and generally you should post a maximum of 3 to 4 times a week. And make sure again that it's meaningful and that your writing is crisp and that your tone is correct and all the things that we've been speaking about during this session. Create engaging content. Don't share only what other people write. Write your own and make sure that relevant personal snippets are also okay to use, as long as there's something that people would find interesting. It was quite fun. A year ago, we happened in our office at W.consulting that 4 of us were wearing, it was winter, and 4 of us were wearing a combination of black, cream, and burgundy, and one of our CPD sorted clients was wearing the same colors. So I actually just quickly snapped a pic and I put it on LinkedIn and I said, it seems as though 4 of us plus a client got the color memo today. Well, that thing went viral. I think more than 2,000 people actually looked at that pic on LinkedIn. And of course I hashtagged CPD, and it just was fun. It was something that I think people enjoyed seeing, something different. I remember also one of my colleagues was on a business trip and he had his W.consulting shirt on, and he snapped a pic of himself ironing that shirt with its logo in his hotel room the night before his training, and he said he just basically made the point about how he was being dedicated and professional, even, I don't know, wherever he was, some other country. And so just create content that's engaging. Make sure that you've got enough content, enough contacts if you want to make your profile on LinkedIn relevant, apparently the magic number is to have at least 500 contacts on LinkedIn. So work to get it there if it's not there. And if this is something that you want to do, of course, there's no reason if you don't feel that this is something that you want to do. And then make sure that whatever you're doing, you keep it positive and inoffensive. Be very careful of political statements or anything that could damage either your own personal brand or the company you work for, their image. Find and join relevant groups, so make sure that whoever you've liked or you've followed, that they are relevant and they'll help them build your own authority. And then finally, make sure that you do keep your brand and your voice and tone and image consistent across all those platforms. And you need to think about your authentic self and make sure that however you are communicating in different ways across these platforms, that it's building up a brand and an image for you that is positive and in line with where you would like it to be. Think carefully about your profile pic. For a start, if you're going to be using social media for work, perhaps it's LinkedIn or perhaps WhatsApp, and we'll chat about WhatsApp more, give some thought to your profile pic. Your profile pic should be you and not something that's unrelated to you, and then people might wonder, are they communicating with the right person? Similarly, if you are going to use a profile pic of yourself, make sure it's a flattering pic. Don't use a pic of your children or a family pic if you are going to be using this in a professional sense. Unless, for example, your profession is as let's say a counselor for children, then you might want to show a picture of yourself with children. But if not, rather leave your children off your profile pic. And I'm just talking about social media that you use in a business context. If you're using a picture of yourself, make sure that it's got the right image and the right projection of yourself that you would like to convey. Just a quick word on using WhatsApp in a business context. The experts say, for a start, actually don't use it for business. WhatsApp themselves say that it's not for business. They have now launched a separate WhatsApp for Business platform, but most of us aren't using that. We're using just the standard WhatsApp. And please keep in mind that it's not really intended for businesses. For a start, it doesn't provide enterprise data protection, and it's also not GDPR compliant. It is in fact a cloud service. It's based in the USA. So be careful of the security. You can't really rely on their end-to-end encryption. And at the end of the day, what you're doing is that you're mixing private and business communication. So just a reminder again about what your profile pic is, and also the fact that you might be sharing business information via a personal platform. So you won't be keeping proper business records, and you won't be using enterprise file sharing solutions on WhatsApp. As a manager, you actually don't know what WhatsApp groups exist in your organization, who has access and who is sharing what with which clients. And once information has been shared on WhatsApp, you can't revoke access to it. So just be cautious with using WhatsApp. I know a lot of us do, and it's convenient, and often we get an answer more quickly from our clients if we use WhatsApp. But just keep in mind some of these cautions that we're mentioning on this slide. And also keep in mind that WhatsApp themselves can terminate your account at any time in terms of their terms of service. So it's one of those areas where we've a little bit blurred personal social media with work social media. So let's just tread carefully and keep these cautionary points in mind. We've come to the end of our session, and thank you for staying with me, and I hope that it's been useful. We've covered the 10 essential rules of effective business writing, and I hope that those have given you some pointers on how to make sure that we write crisply and effectively. I know it was a little bit back to school going with the spelling and grammar section, but those things are always important to remember to make sure that our writing remains professional. And don't forget, you can always go and ask Google how to spell things. You can ask Google for a good alternative word, or you can ask Google anything about grammar and punctuation. So please do turn to that whenever necessary. And finally, we've looked at how to write emails in a more effective way and hopefully not to upset any of our colleagues or clients and the recipients of those emails. If you've got any questions, please feel free to email me on nikki@W.consulting.co.za, and we're always here to answer any queries that you may have. Thank you for joining us today. You'll be receiving an email with the link through to our quiz, which you can answer in order to get your CPD certificate. And we look forward to seeing you again soon on CPD Sorted. All the best. Stay safe.